Hello, and welcome to this presentation about plagiarism, what it is and how to avoid it. My name is Mohammad Keyhani, and I'm an associate professor at the Haskayne School of Business, University of Calgary. Knowing what plagiarism is and how to avoid it is one of the most important skills you need if you want to study at a college or university or work in any line of work or any job that involves content creation. Let's get into definitions. What is plagiarism? There are lots of definitions out there, but I like to define plagiarism as presenting work as original when it is not original relative to the expectation of originality in a given context. So my emphasis in this definition is on originality and that the idea of originality is relative to expectations. The most common form of plagiarism is just copy-pasting someone else's work and presenting it as your own. Usually it's writing, but plagiarism applies to other kinds of content and artwork as well. A dictionary definition of plagiarism is to steal and pass off the ideas or words of another as one's own. Okay, so in my definition, I'm emphasizing originality. But you might say, wait a minute, we know that nothing is original. All new ideas are just combinations of previous ideas. In a sense, that's true, and that's why originality is relative, and that's why plagiarism often involves gray areas and ambiguities. And that's why it's good to get to know what's considered plagiarism in an academic context through concrete examples. I know that many seemingly new ideas or interesting contributions are actually combinations of previous ideas. Actually, it's a famous quote by Pablo Picasso, and this is the way it was quoted by Steve Jobs. The actual words that Picasso used were a bit different, but it is said that good artists copy, great artists steal. So it's an acknowledgement that all new ideas and new innovations and contributions come from some form of building on previous work. Actually, when Picasso was saying this, he was probably borrowing ideas from T.S. Eliot, who wrote in 1920, "The immature poet imitates, the mature poet plagiarizes." When T.S. Eliot was writing this, he was probably borrowing ideas from a previous writer and playing around a little bit to innovate. So the initial source of this quote that we can find is from 1892. "Great poets imitate and improve, whereas small ones steal and spoil." To avoid plagiarizing, I should say that the idea of tracking the origin of this quote and finding who copied who came from an investigation by quoteinvestigator.com. It wasn't my original idea. By citing the source, I'm avoiding a claim that if I hadn't cited the source would make it seem as though I personally did the research to uncover the roots of this quote. Because I didn't do that research myself, I should cite the source. So, some important things to know about plagiarism. It is sometimes ambiguous. The line between plagiarism and non-plagiarism is sometimes blurry. It is context dependent because the expectation of originality may differ in different contexts. For example, copy-pasting your own unpublished previous work may not be considered plagiarism for an article submission to a magazine or journal, but it may be considered plagiarism for a class assignment where the professor expects you to not reuse your past work. A goal of a university class is often to learn new things and to put your mind to work to create new original content. Therefore, in that context, the professor expects you not to reuse any previous work, even if it's unpublished. Whereas a magazine or journal would only consider it plagiarism if your previous work was published somewhere else. Plagiarism is considered a deceit or lie and is unethical. It's usually categorized as academic misconduct. It may even be considered a crime under various labels, including theft, fraud, or copyright infringement. Whether or not you plagiarize and get into trouble with the law, even if you don't get in trouble with the law, it usually involves serious punishment in the university and other organizations that care about plagiarism. It is often discussed under labels such as academic honesty and academic integrity in the university context. There are various typologies of plagiarism out there. One source, Howard 1995, that I have cited in the bottom left corner of this slide, categorizes plagiarism into 3 types: cheating, non-attribution, and patchwork writing. I will show you examples of these 3. Other sources provide different types of categorization. A study by Turnitin.com, which is a software that actually checks for plagiarism, that study suggested 10 common types of plagiarism, although they have some overlaps. And they chose some interesting labels for these 10 types. Things like clone, Control-C, find, replace, remix, recycle, hybrid, mashup, 404 error, aggregator, and retweet. Sometimes just by looking at these labels and reading the short descriptions, it's hard to tell exactly what we mean by that type of plagiarism. So I think the best way to learn what plagiarism is or isn't in an academic context is to go through some concrete examples. That's what we're going to do. Okay. Suppose that I'm a student who's taking a class with Dr. Big Name Toughmores at my university. Suppose the assignment in that class is to write an essay on the benefits of computer simulation as a research method for business. Okay, so this is my assignment. But what's the problem? The deadline is tomorrow. I haven't done any work on it yet. I'm far behind, and I'm worried about handing something in. Why do I bring up the issue of time? Because this is the #1 reason people plagiarize. They don't have time to write original content, so they end up plagiarizing. Okay, suppose I do this as a strategy for dealing with my problem, how to hand in the assignment by tomorrow. I decide to send an email to one of my friends who I know took this same class last year. I know that this friend wrote this assignment and handed it in. So suppose I write an email to them asking them, hey, can you send me the essay that you wrote? And if I plan to basically hand in that essay as my own assignment, maybe even making some small modifications to it so that it's not completely the same. But basically with this strategy, I'm trying to avoid the problem of having to write the essay myself. Now, here's a question for you. Is this plagiarism? Have I plagiarized if I send an essay like this to my professor? The answer is yes. This is plagiarism. This is a form of cheating. I'm handing in someone else's work as my work, and basically cloning someone else's work. Okay, let's think about something else. Another scenario I might work with to try and hand in my assignment on time is to go look at my old work from previous assignments I did, maybe at another university in another program. So I go to my folders, I look for my old assignments, and I see that, yes, I actually have written something before about the pros and cons of simulation. Okay, so would handing this in for my new assignment be considered plagiarism? Yes, this is plagiarism. Why? Because this is relative to the expectation. Here, the professor expects me to do new work and not reuse my old work. So even though it's my work and it hasn't been published, in this case, I would be plagiarizing. If I wanted to use this old material to submit an article about simulation to a magazine, it would not be plagiarism because the magazine doesn't care when I wrote um, my material, but the professor does. The professor wants me to create original content as part of the learning experience in this particular course. Okay, so when dealing with time constraints, always remember being late is always better than plagiarizing. So handing an assignment late, even if it means um, a grade penalty, losing some marks, it's always better than plagiarizing because the penalties for plagiarizing are often much worse than losing some grade on a particular course. Okay, so now let's say we start working on actually writing the essay. Let's think about what is or is not plagiarism and the concrete example of me writing an essay about simulation as a method for business research. Okay, so I'm sitting down behind my computer, I've written the title, I've written my name under the title, and I've managed to write 2 sentences in my essay so far. Do these 2 sentences consist of any plagiarism? What I've written is, business researchers have traditionally been open to a variety of methods, but some methods, such as econometric analysis, have been much more popular than others. In this essay, we suggest that one of the less popular methods, computer simulation, has a lot to offer business research. Is this plagiarism? The answer is, so far, no, it's not plagiarism. Even though I have not cited any sources, we should keep in mind that two types of sentences do not need referencing. One, common knowledge. If something is an idea that's common knowledge for the audience you're writing for, even if it's a quote sometimes, it doesn't require referencing. So right now, my first sentence is pretty much common knowledge for anyone who might be reading my essay. So I don't really need to cite any sources for it. Even though sometimes if you're doubting whether something is or is not common knowledge, it is better to be cautious and cite a source for it. But in this case, it's okay that I haven't cited any source for my first sentence. What is an example of a quote that would not need a citation? Something that's very famous and everybody knows. For example, if I quote Neil Armstrong when he landed on the moon and said, "This is one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." That kind of a quote is something everybody knows, it's common knowledge, and everybody knows its source as well. So I don't really need to, if I use that kind of sentence in a quote in my essay, I don't really need to bring a citation and a bibliographic entry in my references for that kind of quote. Okay, now let's look at the second sentence. Here I'm suggesting something and I'm specifically putting forward my own opinion. When something is your own idea, opinion, or analysis, you don't need to cite any external sources for it. So in this second essay, because I'm making a statement of opinion, I'm saying that I suggest computer simulation has a lot to offer. I don't really need to provide a source or reference. So far I have not plagiarized in writing this essay. But let's move on. After these two sentences, what else can I write? I'm out of ideas. So what do? I can go read external sources. Fortunately, in one of the top academic journals in my field, which is the Academy of Management Review, I can find at least 3 articles that write about simulation as a method for business research. Okay, so reading other works is a great way to get ideas for writing an essay. So I put these works in front of me. Let's say this article by Davis and colleagues from 2007. Let me put this article in front of me. The first sentence of the article says, simulation is an increasingly significant methodological approach to theory development in the literature focused on strategy and organizations. Okay, I like this sentence. It has new ideas that I hadn't thought about before, about how simulation is an approach to theory development. Okay, so because I like this sentence, what if I copy and paste it right after my own writing? I'll write specifically, comma, and then copy and paste this sentence that I like. All right, now I have a full paragraph of writing in my essay. What do you think so far? Have I plagiarized in this essay? The answer is yes. This essay now contains plagiarism. The main reason is that an entire sentence is copy and pasted into my essay without proper citation or paraphrasing. Okay, the meaning of that will become more clear as we go through further examples. Let's say, now that I have copied and pasted that sentence at the end of my paragraph, I go to the end of my essay and I start creating a list of references. And I properly enter the bibliographic entry for the article that I used in the list of references. So as you can see here, the list of references is now there, and I can now claim that I have provided the sources for my writing. What do you think? Is this still considered plagiarism? The answer is yes, this is still plagiarism. Even though I have provided the reference at the end of my essay, I have not done the proper citation. This is an important point here, because I know that in many contexts around the world, different institutions, different countries, different cultures, there are some of them that consider this to be enough referencing. So again, this is why plagiarism is context dependent. In most North American colleges and universities, this is not considered enough citation to avoid plagiarism. This is still considered plagiarism. So this is something to be careful about. Okay, let's get to the details and see how we can avoid plagiarism. How can we modify this so it's no longer plagiarism? What if I do this? I add the citation in the text. So this Davis et al. 2007 that I have added here in parentheses, this is called an in-text citation. So in addition to the list of references, you also make it clear in the text where you cited a particular reference. Because if you don't do this, it's not clear which sentence used the reference that you brought at the end of the essay. Now it's clear. This is the sentence, the last sentence of this paragraph is the sentence that uses the Davis et al. Source. So, is this enough? Can I say now that I have avoided plagiarism? No, the answer is this is still not enough. Most places would still consider this plagiarism. Why is that? I have brought the in-text citation, but this form of citation still does not make it clear that the wording that I have used is copy-pasted from someone else's wording. It implies that I have used ideas from another source, but it does not clarify that the entire wording of this sentence is not mine. In order to clarify that the entire wording of this sentence is someone else's wording, the answer is yes. This paragraph is now clean of plagiarism. I have done all the proper citation and referencing, and I've put quotes around wording that is not my wording, which makes it clear to any reader which parts of this essay is my original contribution and which parts are not. Therefore, this paragraph as it stands now is free of plagiarism. This is the kind of writing we need to aspire to. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about paraphrasing. If we don't want to put quotes around everything, this is a very important skill. In fact, I would say that paraphrasing is the most important skill needed to avoid plagiarism. Let's talk about what paraphrasing is. Okay, I've put the original paragraph with the quote up on the upper right corner of the slide, and my new changes to it in the bottom. So notice that I've removed the quotes around the sentence because I'm no longer using entirely the original wording of that sentence from the original source. Why? Because I've added 4 words in the middle of the sentence. So when the sentence says simulation is an increasingly significant methodological approach to theory development, I have added the words rather than theory testing. Is this paraphrasing? In a way, it is because I have added some words. But overall, if you look at the sentence that I have borrowed from the original source, most of the sentence is still not my original wording. So most people looking at this sentence and the source would still say that this is plagiarism, especially because I haven't put quotes around the parts of the sentence that are not my original wording. So this is still considered plagiarism. What if I take another approach to paraphrasing? I change some keywords to different words. I replace them with their synonyms. For example, here I've changed the word significant with important. I've changed the word development with building. And I've changed the word organizations with firms. So, is this enough paraphrasing to claim that this sentence is no longer plagiarizing? It's a bit of a gray area, but I think most people would consider this type of paraphrasing, where we only find and replace some words with synonyms, to be not enough paraphrasing. So yes, this would still be considered plagiarism. Good paraphrasing involves adding, deleting, and rewording. You have to do these 3 things so much that the new sentence conveys the same idea but looks sufficiently different from the original sentence. Let's see how we can do this. So I've changed the sentence to say, simulation is an increasingly important method of theory building rather than just theory testing. So I've added some things. I've added rather than just theory testing. I've reworded, I've changed the word significant with important, and I've deleted. I've deleted the part about the literature focused on strategy in organizations. Okay, so this new sentence that I'm using, it is paraphrased enough. This is no longer considered plagiarism. I've added some things, reworded some things, and deleted some things, and it conveys the same idea, but in my words rather than Davis et al.'s words. So I would consider that this is enough paraphrasing. Note that I still need the in-text citation, but I no longer need a page number, and I no longer need quotations because this is not the exact wording of the source. Paraphrasing means saying it in your own words, which is why it is harder for non-native English writers, because they are less equipped with ways to say it in their own words. I often hear from non-native English speakers, and I myself am a non-native English speaker, I often hear that when I read something in a source paper, I feel like there is no other way to say it. So I feel like I have to copy and paste the original source because I don't know any other way to say it. This is a common feeling among non-native English writers. And the only way to overcome it is practice, practice, practice. Now, here's an interesting idea. Now that the sentence that used to be copy and pasted is so different, and I've reworded, deleted, and I've added, and it's basically my own wording now. What happens if I now remove the citation entirely? Now that it's my own wording, is it okay to remove the citation and the reference? Is this plagiarism? The answer is yes, this is plagiarism. Although the wording is no longer exactly as the original source, the idea still comes from the original source. It wasn't my own idea. In fact, when I learned it in the source, I said, hey, interesting, I didn't know this. So it's not fair for me to avoid citing the original source. I should be honest and say what my source was. Removing the citation here is a form of plagiarism. Okay, let's think about another scenario. What if the sentence I copied and pasted, and here I'm not paraphrasing, I'm completely copying and pasting. What if it was not from Davis et al.'s work? What if it was from my own previous work, unpublished work that I did for a previous assignment? Is this plagiarism? The answer is, it depends. You are, in a way, plagiarizing yourself, self-plagiarizing, or recycling material from your previous work. Here, it depends on the expectation of originality. Usually, if it's just one sentence from your previous work that was unpublished and the rest of the essay is original work for this new assignment, most professors would be okay with that and would not consider it plagiarism. But if you end up using too much of your previous work, which means that you have not really gone through the learning experience of creating much original content for this new assignment, then most professors would consider this to be a form of academic dishonesty or plagiarism. So be careful that this depends on expectations. Some professors may be okay with recycling your previous work because they may just be concerned about putting together a paper that is submittable to an academic journal for publication. They may not have any worries about whether or not you previously wrote this material anywhere. If you have doubts about the expectations of your professor, always ask. Always ask, what are the expectations of originality? Can I use previous work? Only ask if you doubt. Mostly, the expectation for a class assignment is that the work needs to be original for that assignment. Let's move on to another example. So, remember that we said if you borrow someone else's sentence word for word, if you put quotations around the sentence, if you put in-text citations, and if your in-text citation includes the page number, then that is not plagiarism. Okay, so now look at my expanded paragraph. I have done exactly all the right things. I have borrowed from two different sources, 3 different sentences, pretty long sentences too. but I have put quotations around all of them and I have done all the right citations. Is this considered plagiarism? The answer is yes, most people would still consider this paragraph to be plagiarism, even though all the right things for citation are done. Why is this considered plagiarism? This is considered a form of patchwork writing. You are citing correctly, but you are putting together material, almost all of it is someone else's wording, and you have barely contributed anything original. This kind of writing, most people would consider it plagiarism, even though the citations are done correctly. Okay, now that we've gone through some concrete examples, I want to provide you with some strategies to avoid plagiarism. I think always having a reference management system helps to avoid plagiarism, because one of the reasons that people find it hard to properly cite the work that they're using and add the references is because if you don't use a software for managing your references, it's a difficult thing to do. When something is difficult, hard to do, time-consuming, people tend to not do it as properly as they should. So some of the software that you can use include EndNote, Mendeley, Zotero, and there are other software as well. Even Microsoft Word has some referencing capabilities. In addition to the software, have a system for yourself. Save your files properly, name your files properly. Always take notes when you're reading something and make sure you include page numbers in your notes. This will always help you avoid plagiarism. As I mentioned before, time constraints are one of the most important drivers of plagiarism. So always try to give yourself time, start working on your essays and assignments much before the deadline, and that will help you avoid plagiarism. Embed anti-plagiarism in your research and writing style, even the drafts. What do I mean? I mean, when you're writing drafts or notes, even though they're notes and you know that you're not going to hand them in to anybody, always write indicators for yourself that clarify whether or not you used some external source for every sentence, and clarify whether or not the wording is the same as the source or if you have paraphrased the wording. If you're doubtful about a piece of writing that you have and you are unsure if you've cited everything properly, or if you're unsure if some parts of it were copied and pasted but you don't remember, a great idea is to use software to self-check for plagiarism. There are lots of software that can help identify parts of your writing that potentially could involve copy-pasted material. When you're paraphrasing, you can use Microsoft Word itself or thesaurus.com, dictionary.com, or even Google Translate for finding synonyms to help you paraphrase a given sentence. At any point, if you feel like you still can't do it, you can't paraphrase properly, or you're unsure if your work is paraphrased enough or has the proper citations, always ask for help. The professor you are working with, the professor teaching your class, or any other students who might have better ideas about how to paraphrase or how to cite properly may be able to help you. And finally, if someone catches an instance of plagiarism in your work, always admit to the mistake and try to fix it as soon as possible. I want to provide an example of acceptable versus unacceptable drafts that are handed in to professors before a final assignment is ready. Why am I bringing this example? Because I find that a lot of students get into trouble for plagiarism when they are handing in drafts. Not all assignments require drafts to be handed in. In fact, most assignments, you just hand in the final assignment and you get graded on that final assignment. But sometimes there are assignments for classes where the professor wants you to hand in drafts, one or more drafts, before you hand in the final assignment, typically at the end of the term. So the professor might say, by the middle of the term, hand me a first draft of your assignment, and at the end of the term, hand me the final product. And so you might think when you hand in the first draft, because it's just a draft and you and the professor both know that this is not the final product, then you might think that not citing properly or plagiarizing might be okay in this initial draft. But often students get into trouble with this kind of thinking. An acceptable draft, even if it does not have the proper citations, has some indicator or placeholder for referencing to indicate that some external source was used for a certain sentence. If I fail to include that indicator in the draft that I hand in to my professor, there are lots of problems with that. First of all, the professor, even though they are currently just reading and evaluating a draft, still doesn't know which sentences are my own ideas and contributions and which sentences are not. Furthermore, if you don't include any indicator in your draft of the proper citation, then it's very likely that you actually will forget that you copy and pasted a sentence or that you used some external sources for the ideas in that sentence. It's very, very likely that you will forget to include the proper citations or quoting in the final product. So I would consider a draft that does not have any indicator of use of an external source to be an unacceptable draft, even though both you and the professor know that this is not the final paper. And lastly, if you want to read up on plagiarism and learn for yourself, I would recommend plagiarism.org as a major resource. This is sponsored by the Turnitin software company. Another major resource is a test provided by Indiana University that many professors use because it provides a certificate for free. So what you can do, they have some learning material and tutorials. You can go through them. But once you've done the learning and passed the tutorials, you can actually take the certification test. This is an online test that involves a few questions about plagiarism. If you pass the test, it means that you have a good understanding of what plagiarism is. A lot of professors ask their students to go to this website, take the test, get the certificate, and then upload the certificate to the class learning management system or email their certificate to the professor to prove to the professor that they have passed the test and they know clearly what plagiarism is and is not, and are able to write essays and assignments that avoid plagiarism. So this is something you can do to ramp up your skills about plagiarism. Go to the Indiana University website, take the tutorials, and then Once you're confident about your knowledge and skills about plagiarism, try taking the certificate test. Thank you for listening to this presentation about plagiarism.